At 72, Margaret lives alone in a quiet cottage tucked behind a grove of maple trees. The neighbors know her as the lady who walks every morning in a long navy coat, always with a warm smile, a small wicker basket in hand, and a posture that somehow looks both proud and gentle. But what most don't know is that 10 years ago, Margaret's life broke apart. Her husband of 39 years passed away suddenly from a heart attack. Her children lived out of state, and the house, once filled with laughter, noise, and Sunday roasts, felt like an empty museum of memories. In the months after his passing, Margaret fell into silence. She would make tea and let it go cold. She'd sit in a chair and stare out the window without knowing what she was looking for. The ache was physical. Her chest felt tight, her limbs heavy, her mind foggy. Friends came by at first, then less, then only holiday cards. Everyone assumed she was too fragile, too delicate. But Margaret, quietly and slowly, was becoming something else entirely. She wasn't just surviving, she was transforming. It began one winter morning. She woke up to the sound of her own breath, sharp and alive. She sat up and looked around at the house. The silence didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt clean, like a blank page. That day, she wrote herself a note and pinned it to the fridge. "This is your second life. Start it now." And she did, not with grand plans, but with small, intentional acts. She planted herbs on the kitchen windowsill. She cleared out half the living room and turned it into a reading nook. She joined a community art class on a whim. The Margaret who once leaned on others for plans began designing her days like a painter with a fresh canvas. And over time, something magical happened. She started to feel happy. Not the fleeting kind that comes from distraction or noise, but a quiet, steady joy that settled deep in her bones, rediscovering herself, no longer just a wife, mother, or widow. In the quiet of her solitude, Margaret began to unearth a woman she hadn't met in decades, herself. For most of her adult life, she had been someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's neighbor. Her days revolved around other people's needs, schedules, and dreams. And while she loved her family dearly, her own voice had been hushed beneath the hum of responsibility. Living alone forced a silence that many fear. But within that silence, Margaret found something surprising: clarity. There were no more background voices telling her what she should do, no agendas, no chores that weren't hers to choose. Just space. Glorious, open space. She started journaling every morning. At first, just bullet points: what she ate, how she slept, the weather. But soon the pages filled with memories, thoughts, and ideas. She realized she loved classical music, despite spending decades listening to her husband's country records. She discovered a fascination with Eastern philosophy and started meditating in the afternoons. She took herself out for lunch at a cafe by the river, something she had never done alone before. The waitress asked if she was waiting for someone. Margaret smiled and said, "No, just me, and that's enough." These small acts of self-rediscovery became daily rituals. Margaret wasn't reinventing herself. She was reintroducing herself to herself. And that shift, from external roles to internal truth, was profoundly freeing. For the first time in years, she wasn't measuring her worth by how useful she was to others. Her life didn't need justification. It simply needed presence. What she found was that solitude wasn't loneliness, it was sovereignty. She had time to listen to her thoughts, to feel without distraction, to move through grief without performing wellness for others. Her identity stopped being about who she was to the world and started becoming who she was to herself. Building her days with intention. How freedom turned into fulfillment. One of the most powerful changes in Margaret's life came when she realized she can structure her days for joy, not just for productivity. Living alone meant no one else's clock ruled her time. At first, that was overwhelming, so many open hours. But slowly, she began crafting a gentle rhythm that gave her days purpose and shape without pressure. She woke early, not out of duty, but because she loved watching the sunrise paint her garden golden. Mornings began with soft music, tea, and writing. Not news, not social media, just her, a journal, and the fresh hush of dawn. Mid-mornings were for movement. Margaret didn't go to a gym, she simply walked. Sometimes with a podcast, sometimes in silence, always with attention to her surroundings. The flowers blooming along the sidewalk, the neighbors' dogs, the shift in air between seasons. These walks weren't exercise, they were acts of participation, a reminder that she was still part of the living world. Afternoons were for curiosity. Mondays were library days. Tuesdays, a watercolor class. Wednesdays, she cooked something new from a country she'd never visited. She called these Margaret's Adventures. She didn't need a plane ticket, just curiosity and time. She found that by giving herself small projects, like repotting her herbs, learning how to make lavender sachets, or rearranging her photo albums, she created a sense of movement without exhaustion. Her calendar wasn't full, but it was meaningful. No one else saw her achievements, but she did, and that was enough. Evenings were sacred. Margaret made herself dinner on real plates, with a cloth napkin, a candle lit. She didn't eat in front of the TV. She honored the moment. Sometimes she'd call her grandchildren. Sometimes she read poetry aloud. Sometimes she simply watched the stars appear one by one from her porch swing, blanket over her lap. This structure didn't emerge all at once. It grew slowly, as she noticed what gave her energy versus what drained her. And by listening to that wisdom, Margaret created a life that felt both gentle and strong. A life no one else had to validate. A life that belonged only to her. Staying connected, the art of friendship without obligation. Many fear that living alone means living in isolation. But for Margaret, solitude was never loneliness. It was freedom without pressure. She didn't crave large gatherings or endless calls. What she wanted was real connection, not just social noise. And that's exactly what she created. Margaret redefined friendship on her own terms. She joined a local knitting group, not because she loved knitting, but because she was curious, and it became more than needles and yarn. It became laughter, shared stories, and soft moments of companionship. No one asked too much of each other. No one expected perfection. They simply showed up as they were. She also began volunteering once a week at the local library, shelving books and recommending her favorite titles to visitors. The librarian became a friend. A boy from the neighborhood who loved mysteries started calling her Miss M. She wasn't trying to fill a social calendar. She was simply being present, and relationships naturally formed. Margaret wrote letters, not emails, real letters. She mailed them to her sister in Vermont, to a cousin in Maine, and to her granddaughter at college. Every envelope carried a piece of her time, her thoughts, her care. And the replies, when they came, lit her up. One of her favorite rituals was what she called her porch visits. She would invite one friend at a time, never more than one, to sit with her in the late afternoon sun. No agenda, just tea, cookies, and conversation. These visits filled her more than any banquet or event ever had. He learned that connection doesn't require constant contact. It requires intentional presence. When she spoke to someone, she really listened. When she gave advice, it was offered gently. And when she needed support, she asked for it, not as a burden, but as a human. Margaret's social life didn't look like it did in her 40s. It looked deeper, slower, more intentional. She had fewer people in her life, but those few mattered immensely. Her secret revealed how growing older became growing deeper. Margaret's story is not one of dramatic adventure or worldly fame. It's the story of a woman who turned inward and found everything she needed. In a world that often fears solitude, she embraced it. In a society that links aging with decline, she used it as a doorway to expansion. Her secret, she says, is not complicated. "I stopped waiting," she once told a neighbor. "I stopped waiting for someone to visit, for the phone to ring, for someone to fix my day. I decided I am the one I was waiting for." This mindset changed everything. It gave her the power to make decisions not out of loneliness, but out of desire. To eat well because she loved her body. To decorate her home because it pleased her eyes. To speak kindly to herself because she realized she'd be the one hearing it most. Margaret now sleeps peacefully each night, not because life is perfect, but because it is hers. She built it with care. She wakes with purpose, not for big achievements, but for the little joys that she no longer overlooks. A warm mug, a bird at the feeder, the feel of soft sheets, the smell of lavender oil by her bedside. She discovered that happiness isn't what happens to us. It's what happens in us when we stop resisting the moment we're in. To those afraid of being alone, she says this: "You already have company, your own mind, your own memories, your own heartbeat. Learn to sit with it, and you'll never feel truly alone again." So what's the secret to a beautiful life alone at 72? It's not a list of rules or goals. It's this: let go of roles that no longer serve you. Let silence speak to you. Let small rituals shape your days. Let real connection replace social obligation. Let yourself be enough. Margaret's journey isn't rare. It's possible. For you, for me, for anyone willing to stop waiting and start living. Alone doesn't have to mean empty. It can mean whole.